here in the early morning hours, just including black kids, because now they could actually learn to read now. And it was segregated, of course, but this is where they went to school. And every day after school, those kids would come bursting out of those two doors and they'd go right into the square and play right up until it was time to go home for dinner. An exciting sight. All these kids running out here and playing. Now over in this house was a very rich family. The Wilson family. General Benjamin J. Wilson, retired Confederate general. He lived there with his wife and his two daughters. And the two daughters would stand in those two lower windows on the first floor there next to the front door each day, anticipating all these kids come running out of the school into the square. It excited them. All these kids right across the street from their house. And they wanted to play with them. But that was unacceptable behavior back then. Rich kids didn't play with the poor kids. They certainly didn't play with the black kids. Now, Mrs. Wilson, I think, turned a blind eye and let her daughters discreetly go out into the square and hook up with all these kids to play. And she's very careful not to let anybody know about it, but her secret was revealed later. Now, come 1876, Savannah suffered its third and largest yellow fever epidemic ever. It was devastating. Thousands died. So did Mrs. Wilson. Now, Mrs. Wilson pretty much did all the child rearing back then, which was not uncommon among aristocrats. She pretty much raised the girls herself. I mean, she could have gotten a nanny, but she was a good mother. She really wanted to raise the girls herself. But of course she died now, and now Mr. Wilson has to step up. Now he barely knew his girls. And that wasn't uncommon among aristocrats either. He basically said good morning and good night to them each day. But now he's got to get to know them. And they have to get to know him. And they don't like him very much. He's very strict. Very traditional. Old-fashioned. And he found out that they were playing with the kids from the Massey school, and he put a stop to it. Now the 16-year-old, which is the oldest daughter, at this point she's 16, was always butting heads with this guy over everything. And according to the historical records, she disappears from the scrolls about 1876. Nobody knows what happened to her. She just disappeared. Now, the locals around here say that she ran away from home to get away from her brutal father at that point. Others say that she married young just to get away from him for the same reason. And others say that she died of yellow fever along with her mother. But nobody really knows what happened to her. To this day.
Was the yellow fever outbreak 1870?
1876.
Oh, okay. And so she went off the map.
Right.
As
She
well.
went off the map.
Okay.
So as far as we know at this point, it's just Benjamin J. Wilson and his younger daughter, who's now about 10, 11 years old, who's in this house with her. And she's not about to give up her friends from the Massey School for anything. She lost her mother, she lost her sister. She's not going to give up her friends. And Benjamin J. Wilson was seen often running out of the house into the square, where he'd find his daughter down at the far end of the square hiding out behind the bushes. And he'd grab her by the arm and he'd drag her into the house. And then 5 minutes later, she'd slip out the back door and go right back out into the square and hang out with her buds. And this went on back and forth over and over again. Drove him crazy. But he was determined to put an end to this kind of behavior. And she wasn't going to give up her friends for anything. So one more time, Benjamin J. Wilson comes out of the house, goes into the square, finds his daughter hiding out behind the bushes at the far end, and he grabs her by the arm, drags her back into the house as before. This time, he takes her upstairs to her bedroom on the second floor there. That corner room next to the tree. See the window that faces the square? He took her in there and he sat her down in an armchair and parked it right in front of that window, where he tied all 4 of her limbs to the chair. And then he locked her in the room. Now her punishment was to sit there and watch as her friends came out of the Massey school each day and played in the square without her. And she had to sit there for 3 days. And she couldn't get out of that chair for any reason at all, if you know what I mean. And he brought her no food or no water. Now this is Savannah in 1876. It's like May. There's no such thing as air conditioning. There's no electric fan. That tree was probably just a little sapling back then. Humidity is like 100%. Have any of you been here in the summer? It's brutal. We take like 3 showers a day. I mean, you're soaking wet when you step outside. You're just drenched. I don't know how people lived without air conditioning back then. I just don't know how they did it. Anyway, on the 3rd day, Benjamin J. Wilson returned to that room to let his daughter out. She served her time. And when he did, he found her dead in the chair.
You think?
She died of a heat stroke. Now it's said that she haunted him for the next 3 days. Drove him mad. So mad, in fact, that on the 3rd day after her death, Benjamin J. Wilson returned to that room, sat down in that same chair, parked it right in front of that same window, where he pulled out a revolver and blew his head off. Now that was 1876. Nobody's been able to live there since. This is 432 Abercorn, considered the most haunted house in Savannah, the most haunted house in the state of Georgia, and one of the most haunted houses in America.
And nobody lives in it now.
Nobody lives in there. Now
Who
people have
owns it?
tried.
Who owns it? The city or the
No,
family?
no, there's a woman who owns the house.
She couldn't sell it.
What's
But
that?
She won't live in it,
I was saying
obviously.
she was the last one to buy it.
It's
so
quite
no
dark,
one,
yeah.
No one would buy it from her.
She actually lives in the carriage house out back.
She lives up
Really?
back.
Wow.
She tried living in the house for a while. She lived upstairs in the back, up on the 2nd floor in the back. I guess it didn't work out.
Crazy.
She bought it in 1973. I looked it up. She paid $75,000 for the house, which was probably the going price back then. Today, that's a $2 million piece of property.
Wow.
This is prime real
Nobody-
estate.
Yeah,
Oh, how?
I'll sell it for
Prime
a
real estate.
million and you just knock it down.
But she can't do a thing with it.
I'm sure the same thing would happen in whatever went up there anyways.
Well, she can't knock it down for one reason.
It's
It's
historic.
under
It's a
the
historic
historical,
site.
right.
It's in the historic district. And second, would that even
Yeah.
solve the problem? After all, it is built right on
Piss
top
them
of the
off.
old slave
Right,
cemetery.
right. It's got a double whammy,
Yeah.
triple whammy. Daughter, dad.
Now this is where I saw my first
$100.
ghost here in Savannah.
You seen a ghost?
I've seen 4 ghosts in that house.
Did you see that white cat that walked across the
I
street?
saw it.
See that.
I saw it.
White,
I
y'all.
saw-
White, a white cat.
Yeah, it was about 10 minutes back. Yeah.
That's weird.
Now,
White
if you
cat.
if you go to my Facebook page,